Hey there, Banditos! Welcome to the latest episode of Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have a former colleague of mine on the program. His name is Tom Marvelli, and we worked in the early 2000s at Marvel together. He stayed a lot longer than I did. After my short stint, went on to do a lot of creative work for the company, logo design, style guides, all sorts of things, including working with the early MCU films. Then he went on to Hasbro and worked in their action line, and is really a great, creative director. But now he is also a publisher. He has started his own imprint called Another Door Comics, and he has started his own new series called The Boy and the Bot. First issue already kickstarted. Second issue coming soon to Kickstarter and Indiegogo, so be on the lookout for that. But let's get into it with Tom Marvelli. Tom Marvelli joined the program. Tom, how you doing?
Hey guys, Mike? How you doing, man? It's been a long time since we've last spoke, and really appreciate you guys having me on and giving this spotlight. I know obviously with all the super talent that you guys have on, lending your time and this platform to promote the stuff that we're doing. I really do appreciate it. Obviously you
Absolutely.
have a lot of people on, and I'm here, so really thank you guys.
We are happy to do so and happy to have you. As Tom just mentioned, we actually worked together
Yes.
during my brief time at Marvel,
Mhm.
and we'll get into that. But before we do that, we hit the rewind button all the way to our first question, which is, how did you first discover comic books?
Sure. I mean, it started for me very early on. I mean, obviously being a child of the 70s, early 80s, just being around the pop culture of it all, like the Incredible Hulk television series was a big influence. And of course, you had your Bionic Man, Bionic Woman that were either superhero adjacent. Wonder Woman obviously was another one. You've had, Star Wars obviously being a big influence. And, all the way to music, right? Like the bands like Kiss that were very sort of superhero adjacent. So again, just having that all around me my entire life, it just kind of sort of helped sort of bring me to that path of I wanted to draw and I wanted to kind of tell these type of stories. And again, I knew very early on in life that that's what I wanted to do in some one way, shape, or another. And but my very first comic book was actually besides doing having Incredible Hulk, like coloring books and all that stuff,
Sure. Yeah.
and stuff that was obviously in promotion of the television series at the time, was one of the GI Joe comic books actually with Larry Hama. It was a GI Joe, I believe it was. I want to say it was issue 52. I probably got my numbers wrong, but it was the unmasking where the three characters. And I actually have on my wall over here in my studio. It was my first book that I ever had purchased, and it was GI Joe when you're unmasking, and it was like Destro taking off his mask, Cobra Commander pulling off the hood, and Snake Eyes having his, and like that cover just intrigued me, and I picked that up, and then was buying comic books ever since. It started obviously with they had the animated show with GI Joe that turned into action figures, which then was like, oh, they have stories about this stuff, and comics all going. So there was like going to the local stationery store, and not only was I buying the action figures at the stationery store back in the day when they had those, but also buying the comics on the spinner rack, and it was always the GI Joe, and then it branched off into Batman. I started reading some of the Batman stuff, and that was around the time like the death of Robin was picking up and some of that
Mhm.
stuff, and I was just eating all that stuff up. So I started as a GI Joe person. First it was the Incredible Hulk, and then it was GI Joe, and then it went into Batman, and I was collecting Batman for quite a while. And I have hundreds of thousands of comic books in my basement. It looks like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's all long white boxes in my basement. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of books. So, but yeah, it's been a fun ride of just collecting and now just doing what I'm doing.
Do you still have those original or that original
I do.
issue of G.I. Joe?
I do. Yep, I have it. Like I said, I have that one copy of it here on my office wall, right next to one of my Incredible Hulk comics. I love the one cover where it's a shot of Hulk that was used a lot for licensing, where they pulled that pose of the character and they used it for like all their toy products and stuff. Like when I was a kid, I had like the Hulk, the on the breakable cage where you pumped him up and he broke out of the cage. I had the Hulk muscles, like the padding you put under your shirt and you pumped
Yeah,
them
yeah.
up. So I had all that stuff, and that artwork was used on a lot of that packaging at that time. So I keep
Nice.
that stuff up here as a reminder. And then I have almost the entire GI Joe run, in my basement from that. I went back and bought all the issues prior to that,
Nice.
and then I went all the way to the first run of when Marvel ended the series, and then the Todd McFarlane one that they put out after the G.I. Joe special. So I bought that one as well. So I have all of that whole run, tons of Batman and so forth. But yeah, I have a pretty vast collection of things for sure. Um,
So you were a collector, you were a
oh
reader
yeah,
from an early age.
yeah,
When did you figure out, or how did you figure out that you wanted to
sure.
work in the
Yeah.
industry, and how did you make your way to the industry?
Sure. So one of those things with me was it was again maybe it's just to my own detriment, maybe who knows, but I had a very myopic view of like this is what I want to do, right? And
Yeah.
I didn't care what it was going to take to get me to that point. I just knew that was I knew that was going to be the destiny in some way, shape, or form. However, I needed to make it happen and will it to be. And so again, I started drawing at a very early age, looking at the comic books, redrawing some of those characters. They had the How to Draw G.I. Joe books back in the day. I would draw from those. There was the Marvel handbooks, the Universe handbooks, and I would draw the characters, the head to toe poses from there. And then from sort of mimicking those, I started just telling my own stories, taking some of those, like tracing the drawings and making them new characters, but telling different stories with them. So it was always sort of in that storytelling space. But I always knew that's what I wanted to do. And in high school, obviously, even back before that, even middle school, like I was taking advanced drawing classes. In middle school, I was already in high school classes. And then in high school, I was taking collegiate courses. And, with the luck of obviously having great teachers that helped really support that endeavor, not like scolding me because I was drawing on my, drawing Superman on my exam papers. They were really encouraged. They were like, "Hey, you should really look into going to college for this." And ultimately, I went to Purchase College, which is a SUNY school upstate New York, and I went there for graphic design because I knew, I didn't want to put all my, obviously I wanted to do the comic book thing, but I knew I was like,
Right.
all right, with graphic design, you can make a living and you have a wider shot of that. So it wasn't like all eggs in one basket. So I wanted to do graphic design, but I took figure drawing courses and was doing a lot of that stuff on the side for my main curriculum. So like it was crazy because I majored in graphic design. I minored in sociology and I was taking business courses at night on top of like the regular figure drawing and just telling my, doing my own comic book. And back then, actually, my senior thesis for college was building a full comic book, hardcover graphic novel that I did. And I'm actually looking to redo that story. That's, spoiler alert, that'll be one of the next things we do. And we'll get to that in a minute. But so I started doing my own illustration and comic books there. And then from there, I went out into the workforce and I started my first real major job was working at Macy's, which was under their special projects division. So not all the non-fashion stuff. So I
Okay.
was working on like the Macy's balloon, like the parade posters, all the key art for that. Hiring artists, obviously, working with them on that as an art director. The flower show, all the event tie stuff that wasn't fashion specific. And because I could draw, I was doing like we would do these sort of gift with purchases, which was really about selling the toy item in conjunction with that holiday. So the gift with purchase one year was like a Snoopy, it was millennials, millennial Snoopy. We did music like Mickey Mouse and so on. So I was only there for a couple of years. And what was great was that because of my illustration background, I did the 10-second ad spot. So I storyboarded how they should look and telling those stories for those 10-second ad spots. And one of the sort of the great highlights of my career was like the Snoopy one, like Charles Schultz was alive at the time. This was like in the late, maybe mid to early 2000s. So I did the storyboard. It went through his agency, obviously. And according to them, again, all the notes came through them, but they said, oh, Charles reviews all his stuff himself, right? And so I did the storyboard and he gave me his notes basically saying, oh, Snoopy would have this in his doghouse, not this. And because I had like, there was a scene where I had him like kind of rummaging through his doghouse and he was like, no, he wouldn't have this. He would have this instead. So it was cool. Like I was getting feedback from Charles Schultz, which is pretty cool. And that was always one thing that even just sort of jumping around, but like early days in high school when I was drawing, John Buscema was like the first like professional who reviewed my portfolio. It's like, oh, you got to work on your anatomy and do stuff like that. So I've always sort of taken in that information and you always, again, one of the highlights is being able to talk to those people and to help guide your career that way. And it's always those little moments that can have much bigger impacts. And those were two very big ones for me, John Buscema and obviously Charles Schultz giving me his comments. And so I was there for a couple of years. Um, and then in the early, let's say late 2000, early 2001 is when I went over to Marvel. And, I had met with, it was Bill Jemas was the president at the time. And he interviewed me for basically to help do the creative for all the branding, style guide development, et cetera, for Marvel. And one of the first things that they were doing at that time was, remember the Elektra comic book? It was Chuck Austin was writing it. And obviously, Mike, you were there at the time when we were doing that. And that was like the very first project. Trial by Fire was like, hey, we're bringing her back. Brian Bendis is writing it. Chuck Austin is drawing it. And we need a new logo. They're doing like this whole campaign around it. And so Trial by Fire, I didn't even know like where the fonts were in the computer. Like it was all like, again, pretty crazy, get thrown in there. And I was literally doing it, like learning the ropes at the office during the day, and at night actually doing a lot of the work. And so Elektra was like the first project. So the Elektra logo for that book, starting with issue 1, was like one of my first projects there. And it was crazy. Again, one of those like the small things that have big, big memories for me is like when I first started, Bill was walking me around, introducing me to everybody, and so on. And again, this was like again trying to stay calm, cool, and collected while knowing like I just hit my dream job, and like trying not to be like a giddy fanboy, but like in all the the best sense of that, and try to be like, all right, I'm professional now. I got to act professional. Meanwhile, like I'm jumping in my skin, and like he introduced me like Joe Quesada, who was there, and obviously I had followed what he was doing with Marvel Knights with Daredevil, and all the Ultimate Spider-Man line was just starting. I think they were on issue 2 when I started there. And meeting him, I was like, wow, I'm meeting like all the people I was reading about, and as a fan for Wizard Magazine and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And now here I am interacting with these folks on a daily basis. And that was sort of like that pinch me moment of like, wow, like all the parties I didn't go to, all the socializing I didn't do to stay focused on the career I wanted, I was finally in the door. And at that moment, it was really up to me to make or break it. At that point, like the opportunity was there, and it was up to me whether to succeed or not. And I tried very hard and did a lot of stuff to make sure that like I had great longevity there. And I was there for many years, a couple of decades almost.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, I remember when I came into Marvel, it
yeah.
was sort of similar. Just
Mhm.
seeing the bullpen that it actually
Right.
existed, and there are people
Yes,
that are doing, all these various
absolutely.
functions.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
really is kind of an eye-opening experience.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that actually I kind of skipped it, but one of the things when I was at college, I had interned at Marvel back in 90. I'm dating myself now, is probably 96, 97, roughly around there.
Hmm.
And so I was interning under Bobby Chase's office. And that was before like the major layoffs. That's when before Ike had bought the company and all that stuff. Like when um I forgot what books were going on. It was funny just talk about small world stuff. Like I was sitting in Bobby's office when Larry Hama came in, and G.I. Joe had moved over to Dark Horse at the time. And so Larry's sitting right next to me on the couch, and here I am, like the guy who been reading his books since like the early days, and now he's in the office sitting like one seat cushion away. It was pretty cool. And
Yeah.
again, you get to meet and see all these people that you always read about. And so anyway, while I was interning there, a friend of mine, her brother had asked me to do like a guest lecture at like an elementary school where he was a teacher. And so anyway, I did the lecture, came in, was just kind of talking comic books and so forth. And the local paper took a photo of me, with the kids. And so I got a copy of that paper. My friend's brother gave it to me, and I cut it out and I put it in my wallet. And it was like, and I just kept that as like a sort of a mental reminder, like no matter what happens in life, this is what I want to be doing and where I want to be. And so I jumped around. So when I met with Bill for the Marvel interview, and we were talking, I actually pulled that out of my wallet. I was like, yeah, see, this is like no joke for me. And he goes, that's a very Rocky thing to do. It was kind of funny, you know. And but yeah, so I kept that in my wallet the entire time. As life kept passing, then finally ultimately getting the job at Marvel. And like I said, I was there from 2001 to about 2014. And I started originally, like I said, doing some logo stuff for publishing. And then our department very quickly was merged with the Toy Biz team. Because remember back in the day, Marvel, there was Marvel and then Toy
Yep.
Biz when Perlmutter had acquired the company fully. And so we merged the two groups together. So I was doing licensing, stuff, and then I would dabble in the packaging where they needed me to, but that wasn't really. I was there mostly for the style guide development. It was just that the Toy Biz side, the licensing side of the toy side of it, would lift from a lot of that branding from to make their packaging. So I worked
Mm.
with them. We were pretty integrated that way. And the very first project that I had to start that was for there was the first Spider-Man movie with Sony. Because
Yep.
as you remember, back in the day, the way it started was that Marvel had sold all the licenses to all their film franchises to all these different studios, right? So you had Spider-Man with Sony, which obviously they still do, but obviously the deal's a little different now. Fox had, they had obviously Fantastic Four and the X-Men franchises, and then Universal with Hulk and so on. So when I first started, it was working with Sony and Spider-Man, and of course it was like, hey, we need this brand guide, this style guide, and we're already late in its delivery in terms of like where they needed to be in the starting point. So I very quickly, because I could draw as well, so I was hiring artists, drawing. So I brought in like Brian Hitch was one of the artists that did the first Spider-Man movie content with me. I drew some of it, like I said, myself. John Cassaday, the late great John Cassaday, he did a couple of pieces for me, and so on. So very quickly we dove in and just started building the brand guide, while still getting to know like the new team I was a part of,
Right.
because I came in as a senior art director, and obviously they had people above, side, and below me in terms of titles and rank and all that stuff, and so just learning to work with all these new folks while trying to get this guide completed. So again, trial by fire, and I loved every minute of it. And got to work with the folks, the great guys over at Sony, and that relationship, and it really just started from there. And I got to work on every single film, not only our partner films, like I said, all those studios that I mentioned, but then also when Marvel started their own studio with Iron Man and so on. So I got to work on, from a brand perspective, brand style guide perspective, work on from Iron Man all the way to Cap Civil War, which again, and that was all on the branding side, besides not only on the film entertainment side, but also style guide development for our regular, what we called our evergreen properties, right? Your basic Spider-Man, your X-Men, and so forth, that was adjacent to film, but was still in that classic comic book inspired, look. And then all of our animated programs as well. So like Avengers, Earth's Mightiest, I worked on that. Avengers Assembled, I mean, you name it. Ultimate Spider-Man, the TV series for that. So I got to work on all those programs, and those, but especially with animation. My team at the time, we would develop all the logos for the entertainment, as well as we would also do the script reviews, make sure that the things in there worked well with our toy company, our toy partners, to make sure that there was stuff in there for them. Again, and just give script notes on stuff. So I would do that for all the animated shows, besides feeding in, obviously, and then characters as well. So working with the different talent at the studio. So when they would send in control art on what these characters look like, we would provide notes to those as well. So again, very much on that entertainment side of things, on top of, through the lens of branding and style guide development, and so did a lot of that for many years, obviously. And then one of the things I would say, probably maybe a few years in, on the publishing, the collection side, they had asked me to, because I guess they liked what I was doing on the largest style guide stuff. They asked me if I would be interested in taking over the collection side as far as the design of that stuff. So at that time, so they merged that group over. The designers that were doing that material came over, started reporting to me, and so I started working on like the Civil War stuff. So I was the creative director at that point. They promoted me up to creative director, and so the Civil War series, that line look, like I oversaw that line look, developed it, built all that stuff, and then because again, actually, it was on a call not too long ago with Joe, and he reminded me, he goes, "Hey, did you know that that was like the largest selling graphic novel of all time for Marvel?" And I'm like, "I had no idea, but cool, I guess."
Yeah.
I'll take it. I mean, I have like the least amount to do with that, but I'll take it. And but anyway, but it was great. Obviously that obviously turned out really well. Then because of the sales of that, they started giving me all the blockbuster, sort of their summer tent, what they call their tent pole, in the publishing stuff, their tent poles.
Yep.
So like Siege, and we did a whole bunch of different ones, and then just logo development. So I was doing logo development for the books, my team. Logo development, trade dress design. We designed all the hardcovers and paperbacks, the looks, all the design material that was in those books. We designed all that as well. So that was on the publishing side and did that for many years as well. And then the other part of the business, which was our live events business, and that was like your theme parks, your live action shows, it's that kind of stuff. And we had done a lot of licensing deals with a lot of various partners, and a lot of them were now starting to come to fruition from a becoming like a real production. And they needed somebody to help from a brand point of view oversee that stuff. So it was a lot of the same thing, script review, sometimes actors, voice talent, special effects, and depending on what the program would call. Some days I could be looking at, trust work for a roller coaster, and other days I'm looking at costumes for, an event, character, actor, what have you. So it was a lot mixed bag of stuff there. And so again, I ran the live events side of things from a creative perspective as well. So again, I got to work on a lot of different things, and then not only the style guide stuff, the other stuff they gave me was the promotional stuff. So for instance, like for our own films, when Marvel started its own studio, like the stuff when we use photos on soda cans or like Reese's Pieces, any of that, promotional item stuff where we would have promotional partners, we had to build brand kits for that material as well. So like the Reese's of the world and so forth could utilize that material. So I was doing a lot of photo shoots with the actors as well. So I would, team up with, this time was the theatrical marketing, creative team over at Disney, and I would partner with them on the photo shoots. So like I would say, like when they would do like the theatrical one sheets and so forth, during those photo shoots, I would sort of pair up with them and do the photos that we needed for the promotional pack. So I got to meet all the actors for all the films, and just a great time, like had to give a presentation once. I was like 400 of our licensing partners down in New Mexico on the platform, right? The helicarrier set was behind me. Yeah, just great memories. Other stuff with like Andrew Garfield when he was playing Spider-Man, his costume, part of the mask and stuff. They had to ship that to my house because we were doing like an event thing with that. So again, it's just very cool moment, and just getting to walk on all the sets for all the different films that we worked on, costumes, meaning, just all the artisans involved in making a film is just incredible. And so I got to be a part of all of that. So, I look back on some of that stuff and it was like the little kid who was like, I want to draw comic books and do all this other stuff, to do that, to now be doing the stuff that I was doing. It was just, I was awestruck by that, like, wow, like, the dream job came true, and I know how fortunate I was for that, because like that doesn't happen for everybody, like, and I just lucked out, whatever they call that. What do they call success? Like it's the cross section between preparation and opportunity, the success, and it just happened to hit for me, and I worked really hard to make sure that I was doing the best work that we could possibly do.
Yeah. That is an amazing amount of experience or experiences to
Sure.
have at a major company at the right time too. That's part of
Right.
that opportunity, right? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
when Marvel is hitting its stride. It's becoming a studio. It's
Yeah.
having all of these successful events in publishing, doing, live events, all that kind of stuff. It's just I only got the very small beginning portion of it,
Yeah.
but to be able to do some of those things are just probably beyond your wildest expectations.
Absolutely. I mean, when I first started, like I said, Marvel was just coming out of bankruptcy at the time,
Right.
and like in sort of the remnants of that. And then again, it's one of those things that people don't talk about it enough. It's like, oh, because we all take it for granted, like Marvel's Marvel, but it wasn't always Marvel in the sense that it is today. Like, and what it was even in recent years. It's like there's a lot of really smart, good people doing a lot of really good hard work, and it's amazing to see like books being written about it, Harvard review studies about it, obviously looking at it from sort of an outsider's
Right.
POV, looking at it, it's like, and they're writing about things that I lived through in a lot of ways, in one way or another. And it was just an amazing thing to be a part of, like seeing that subculture, if you will, turn into major pop culture. And I'll never forget, like when like the Captain America t-shirt, the shield was like like the #1 selling like IP graphic tee, element. Like it was just an amazing time, and you're just leaving the house and it's like it's not just now in comic conventions or specialty shops, but like you're walking in the street and people are just wearing it as like a lifestyle brand,
Yeah.
and we were a part of that. It's like, how do you figure out how do you sell, the comic books, knowing that comic books by and large are a very male dominated sort of audience and so on. It's like, how do you bring in, females into the culture of this stuff? No, there's always, obviously there's been females that are uber fans and writers of comics and so on, but I'm talking about just the mass audience, the general
Right.
audience, right? And it's like usually and typically it always was like the girlfriend being brought to the film, right? And it went from that to like the girls wanting to now see the movie themselves. Like they were vested in the stories and the characters and all, and they still are. And but that was like we had to figure out how to bring that audience in, like what's going to appeal to them. And that's why like like the retro brand stuff that we were doing, the taking the old 50, the old 1960s comics and turning that artwork into like graphics, and then how do you turn that into like a fashion forward property?
Right.
So girls are wearing like fashion like handbags with this stuff and dressing in it. It's like because obviously boys, they have their backpacks and their t-shirts and stuff, but it's like how do you bring in, women into that? And I had a good sociological experiment in my own home because like I said, I have a boy and girl twins, and I raise them exactly the same. They're seeing the same stuff. They're interacting with it, Spider-Man and so on. And there was a point where my daughter was like, "Oh, this is for boys," like that was sort of the mentality for her. And I'm like, "No, it's not." Like, look, and then like bringing her along into it because of that the societal thing where it's like, "No, that's a boy thing," and it's like, "No, it's
Right.
not." And so anyway, but that was like the seeing the cultural aspect of it, and that's why like for my career, it originally where I wanted to start with like drawing the comic books and do the sequential art, it really turned into doing more the licensing stuff, like
Hmm.
so like I was doing a lot of Avengers like style guide artwork and drawing a lot of those characters, like so my stuff was like seen all over the world. It's like one of those things where it's really odd because like in a comic, you know who the talent is, right? The talent's
Yeah.
promoted, their names are in the books, what have you. But like the stuff that I was doing, whether I led it or did it myself, it's like my name is not like it's like everyone knows the work, but they don't know who did the work.
Right.
And one of the best examples of that for me was like the first Spider-Man movie. Actually, I went to go visit my mom, and she went to go to the shoe store for whatever reason it was at the time. So we went to some local, like in a mall shoe store, what have you. And I knew the merchandise that I had worked on the style guide for was now starting to hit shelves for the promotion of the film. And so I went over to like the kids aisle, kids area where the shoes, the Spider-Man shoes were. And the first set of shoes there, I saw Spider, it had my artwork on it. So like the cross, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Because now I get to share this moment with my mom, who was like, who saw me drawing as a little kid. And it's like, one of those like, look, mom, I made it kind of moments. And having been that little kid that always had that stuff, and her whole attic was full of it, you know, and so showing her the shoes and stuff, and then ironically, it just happened to be one of those weird moments where this little kid comes running. He sees them from afar, the shoes, the Spider-Man stuff. Because again, we were promoting the film at the time, so it's obviously it's hitting the lexicon of things. And this kid comes running over, dragging his mom over. He's like, "Mom, look, Spider-Man, Spider-Man." And he picks up the shoes after I was done looking at it. But my mom happened. It was a really cool moment because like the kid picks up the shoes like Spider-Man. Little did he know, like the guy who actually drew that picture was like 2 feet away from him, and so he's sharing something new with his mom, and I'm sharing it something same but different with my mother at the same time. It's just one of those cool kind of moments of like, look, all that hard work and all the things you go through to be an artist, like it paid off.
Yeah.
And it was just great to be able to share that in real time with my mom at the time. And but yeah, and it's like I had friends like that were visiting like in France, and they were like, "Hey, I think I see your artwork here." And so while I never really while my time at Marvel, or any up to recently, did I never really got to draw the sequential stuff. I did do a lot of stuff. So like from 2000 to like 2014, like there's a good chance if you were wearing something with Spider-Man or any of the Marvel characters, either I drew it or I had folks that people that I worked with who did.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just one of those fun things. But yeah, that time at Marvel was just pretty incredible for sure.
Yeah. Um, Listen, I definitely want to get to the subject of the day, which is the Boy and the
Sure.
Bot and your new
Yes.
publishing company. But
Mhm.
I didn't want to skip over. I wanted to at least ask you about Hasbro because that's
Sure.
another sort of
Oh, of
geeky
course.
goodness kind of
Absolutely.
company.
Mhm.
And from what I read, though, it seems you were on the action brands, right?
Correct. Yes. Yep.
But that didn't include Marvel, which is a little odd because you had all that Marvel experience.
Right. Absolutely. So just to give you some backstory there. So while I was at Marvel, one of my master partners, or our master partners at the time, was Hasbro, right? They were the master toy partner. So I'm on calls with those folks like on a weekly basis, right? And we're going through reviewing and looking at the stuff they're doing, helping to find them artists for their packaging. And I built a really good relationship with the folks at Hasbro that I was working with, like I said, on a weekly basis and having meetings with them and sharing. And it was just a great collaborative experience with those folks. And so after two jobs later, Hasbro, again, after I had left, it was NECA, the toy company. So after Marvel, I left Marvel. I was the EVP then of over at NECA Toys, right? So
Okay.
a very short period, about a year and a half there. And then after that, I was like, you know what, I'm going to start my own company. So because again, having been at Marvel, being at Central Creative, you have contacts in a lot of different lines of business. So I started my own company and I started working with all these different organizations, like Pop Sockets was one. I worked with like this fun.com out of Minnesota and doing some product development and some other stuff. So I was doing a lot of, and then one of my clients was Hasbro. They had, because of my stuff with Marvel, they had brought me in to help illustrate some stuff, help design some concepts for packaging and so forth as a freelancer, as an agent outside of the norm. And so I was doing that for a little while, and then ultimately, Hasbro called me saying, "Hey, would you be interested to come up for a full time?" I was living in New York at the time, and they asked me if I would be interested in coming up for a full time role at Hasbro. And it was a no brainer for me because, like I said, I had known all the folks that I was interacting with, not only with my own company at the time, but also through my days at Marvel. And it was a great group of people. And I was like, yeah, I think I know like because I've worked with Hasbro for so long. I know their strengths, I know their weaknesses. I wasn't gonna be like, hey, I'm just gonna fill a hole and be done. Like I knew I could impact some change in a good way and bring some of that sort of Marvel mentality, if you will, to other companies, which is what I wanted to do. And so I started at Hasbro. I was there for 6 years, and to your point, I worked on all the action brand stuff other than Marvel and Star Wars because those are licensed out, right? So their creative inputs and stuff are coming from Marvel and they are coming from Lucas.
Mhm.
Um, so it wasn't as much for me to do because again, they're taking the style guides that my old team was developing and
Yeah, okay.
translating a lot of that material and utilizing a lot of that material to create their materials. So I wasn't as needed in those spaces because it was already being fed. The action brand stuff that I was a part of was the stuff that was self-produced by Hasbro, meaning Transformers, G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, things that Hasbro owned, whole stock, and that they had to
Got it.
develop from scratch themselves. So it was a lot of taking that sort of Marvel playbook of like style guide development, a brand guide development, and stuff they were doing already, but it was just like how do we put more into these guides that more groups can use it? Because Marvel was very different in its structure than Hasbro. Hasbro has a lot more different departments who all kind of make their own materials, whereas Marvel is a central creative team. It's only 19 of us at the time, and we're all building that material that is servicing the entire organization, the entire blueprint. And one guide, as I used to joke, is like one guide to rule them all. And whereas Hasbro is that guy, but then they all make their offshoots. Neither is right or wrong; it's just different. And but I tried to bring in, and knowing that it was going to service all these different groups, how do I bring in as much material as possible into this one guide that there's not a lot of people needing to go make duplicative artwork, duplicative branding materials. There's one thing that services everybody. So that's what I was doing at Hasbro. So I worked on Transformers, and I just ironically enough, it just happened to be one of these things where because of my entertainment background as well and script reviews and stuff for animation and so on, we started with Transformers, and it originally started as it was Transformers War for Cybertron was what it was called. It was not the video game, but it was a toy collection. They were doing unrelated to the video game, and so we called War for Cybertron. And the idea was that the product developers came to us with like some battle damage type characters and so forth. But I was like, well, what's the story? From a brand perspective, I always want to know like what's the story, right? As a storyteller, that's what's going to resonate most,
Right.
right? Points of articulation, that's great marketing stuff, but what's going to make someone care? What's the narrative? And so for my side of it, it was like, well, what's the story? And we didn't have a story. So I was like, all right. So the way that I pitched it was, I'm going to create the cinematic event that doesn't exist, right? For the branding for this material. And so I took the product developer, again, old Marvel hat. I took the product developer, I took one of our copywriters and a few others. I took them to a different building, sort of locked the door in the room, whiteboarded, and we sat there and we broke story. It's like, all right, what's one, what's two, what's three? Because we knew that in the third section is needed to end on an anniversary, which was the Beast Wars anniversary, right? So we needed to come up with a narrative that was going to be like, all right, well, what's the character arc from 1, 2, and 3, and built it all out. So we walked away. We set up a day, like, remember the old editorial retreats? It was like that kind of mentality to it.
Right.
And so we broke this story. We locked in. It's like, all right, from a toy perspective, what figures are you making? All right, what characters are you? So we can bucket those. So to start to build that connective tissue of what the storyline is. And one of the other things we had was that from a narrative standpoint, they wanted something that felt a little bit like the early days of the movie Dunkirk, right? Like it's the last days of the war and all that stuff. So the beginnings of when they have to get off the planet is what we ultimately landed on for the War for Cybertron. So we built War for Cybertron Siege, we built War for Cybertron Earthrise, and then we built it was the Kingdom, which was the third act, the third section of it. And so I started with Siege, and from a brand perspective, I was like, here's the storytelling. So I sat them all in a meeting, and brought in all the heads of the company that were involved with Transformers at the time, and I basically pitched them saying, hey, here's what the brand journey is going to look like from 1, 2, and 3, knowing that there's this umbrella story structure we're trying to create. Now, mind you, we had no entertainment, we had none of that. It was just this is what the branding and how we're going to tell a story of branding. I'm going to create these cinematic looking posters, very Drew Struzan-esque, get that epic feel to them. And that's what we wound up doing. And then the other stuff was we built the brand guide. And from that, they started wanting, obviously pitching to entertainment. And so we brought in Rooster Teeth at the time. Obviously, they're not together anymore, but we had Rooster Teeth. We brought them in. We had the brand guide, and we sat down with their team and took them through the brand guide. And to their credit, they looked at the brand guide that my team had developed based on the story stuff we were doing, and they said, we want to make we want to make a show about this. And to their credit, they did. They took our brand guide, they took their pitch material. We co-wrote the pitch for this narrative.
Right.
They reworked it, obviously, to fit into their criteria and what they needed. They took it to Netflix, and we wound up getting a 3-season deal out of it. So, and that all just started with the idea of, there's some ideas that they want to push this entertainment, because obviously that helps drive business. But at the same time, they didn't have it yet. So it's like I had to kind of, I used to joke, like, if you build it, they will come, right? And so it was like we had to build that story. And there were things that in there, like, again, same thing, doing script review, character review. I was doing a lot of that same stuff, working with them, with Rooster Teeth and the teams on that side, reviewing Netflix's key art, that kind of stuff. And so I was doing a lot of action brand stuff related to that. And that was, step and repeat. Not only was it just for, like I said, Transformers, but Power Rangers. Got to work on a lot of the Power Rangers material. And G.I. Joe, obviously, we were emerging with G.I. Joe with the Snake Eyes film, so did the branding for the Snake Eyes movie and so on. So it was a lot of that old hat Marvel stuff being brought into the Hasbro world.
Yeah.
And like I said, I did that for about 6 years. And then after that, like I said, that brings me to what I'm working on now, which is like, I felt that after all these years of shepherding and these other brands and getting them out in the world in my own way with the brand guides and the stuff that we were doing, the one thing I haven't sort of checked the box on, which is telling my own stories and writing, and truly going back to that little kid, which is like drawing and writing and my own comic book stuff. And like I said, I've always push other people's, like, I hate to use the word IP, but like the IP of this stuff, and shepherding those and fostering those. But I was like, can I do it for myself? Can I take on this challenge and see where it goes? So with my kids now, again, now going off to college, my mental state of that was like, the thinking was empty nest overnight. The twins are off of college. It's gonna be very quiet at my house. at night, and I'm going to put my time into this, and writing and working with other artists and stuff to help tell these stories that I have in my head. And so I started that, and then, like I said, when the Hasbro stuff ended, I was like, all right, this is the universe really telling me this is the direction you should go, for at least, if not forever, for the rest of the duration, at least for this period of time, right? And as we go through, and so it started very quickly. I started getting the teams together, and the team that we have on the book. So I started like, there's a story that I had written again years ago, and it was just kind of sat on the table. And then after the Hasbro stuff went away, I dusted it off and started reworking it. And that became the foundation for the story, The Boy and the Bot. And so then from there, I started bringing in artists because, again, I want to do the drawing, but I was like, I know to get this thing started, I need other people to help this process. It's very hard to launch something as a one-man band, and certainly wouldn't want to be that. I like working with other people, especially creative folks. And so I brought in, the first person I reached out to was Rafael Lorero. So he's the main illustrator on our story. He actually went off, he's doing Marvel, he did Marvel's Dazzler most recently.
Mhm.
And spoiler alert, he's coming back. He's going to do a cover for me for book 3, which is great. And again, we've become quick friends just through this process. And one of the things I did, which was, again, just great to again, how you have impact on people and how you're able to work with folks, like calling up some of the old Marvel artists and friends that I have, saying, hey, I'm not at Hasbro anymore. Here's what I'm doing. And people are like, hey, how can I help? How, sign me up. Like, how can I help? Where can I help you see your dream into reality? And like John Tyler Christopher, who is an artist, he does a lot of Marvel covers. He does like a lot of the Star Wars packaging covers for the Star Wars line and stuff. And him and I stayed in contact from those days at Marvel through my time at Hasbro, because I brought him in to do some projects for me there as well. And so I called him and he's like, hey, how can I help you? And so he did a cover for me as well. So again, it was just great to be back in contact with some older, comic book folks that I hadn't spoken to in a while, or some new ones. And like I said, Raphael is the main illustrator on book 1. Ren Spiller is our colorist. Ren is coming off of, or I don't know if he's still working on it or not, but Massive, the publisher Massive, he's the
Mhm.
colorist on Ram God. He's done some other stuff as well. And there's a couple of artists that helped on book 1, because, like I said, Raphael had moved off to go work on Dazzler. So I had brought in Daniel Maya, and Daniel's done a lot of great stuff, as well as Leo Rodriguez. He worked on DC Comics as well. And so again, just a great group of folks that came in and worked on the book. And now the book itself, the first volume of the book, we're crowdfunding it. So I started, when I thought about the idea of the brand itself, it's like, no matter what doors open or close, right? You can always set your own path. You can always create your own door. And that's why I wanted to call it as Another Door Comics. So that one of those things where it's no matter what, there's always other opportunities, even if you have to make them yourself, right? And so that's why it was called Another Door Comics, or it is called that. And so I started with the logo. I said I knew the boy in the box, so I worked on the logo development for it. Again, it was old hat Marvel. It was just like those old sort of muscles coming back in certain instances. And building out the trade dress, what does that look like? And like I said, the logo development and the character development of it all. And because again, we started from nothing, and I had just built it from the story. And working with Raphael in the early days of like, what should the robot look like, and showing that to some kids and saying, hey, how does this, almost like testing it, if you will,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so it was doing a lot of that.
Focus group.
Right, exactly. Doing a little focus group stuff on some of the early development materials. And so from that, we built the story, and then it was like, well, how do I want to now get this out to the public, right? And it's like, this is not just for me. I want to share the story with as many people that would be interested in wanting to read it. And so we started with crowdfunding, obviously with Kickstarter and Indiegogo as being the 2 major platforms. We set the bar very low because, again, you never know how these things are going to go. So we set that crowdfunding threshold very low. They both funded on Indiegogo and Kickstarter. So we were able to print, all the books that we, obviously, and make all the things we were making. I was doing remarks and signatures and all that fun stuff. We made these little press kits for everyone, gave out T-shirts. So we did a lot of that kind of upfront fun stuff. And we wound up doing 6 variant covers for that first volume. Like I said, Raphael did book, cover A. I illustrated cover B. I had brought in Tracy Ching. Tracy is a fantastic artist. She worked with me on at Hasbro on a project, our Snake Eyes packaging. She's recently worked on. If you go on Netflix, it's funny. I was looking on Netflix. I saw something. I was like, wait a minute, that looks like Tracy's art. Sure enough, it was. So she's doing some key arts for some entertainment material, and a whole host of other stuff. So she did cover C for me. Cover D is John Tyler Christopher's. So he did that, and then I brought in another artist for cover E, Daniela. And she's really, really fantastic. She's out of Mexico. And for that, I wanted, because I had the action, if you look at some of those covers that we did, we had the action aspect covered. And I wanted something that had a little bit more warmth to it, a little more heart. And so she was able to put that together for me, and she did a fantastic job on that cover. And then the last one is our graphic, the cover F. It's like the graphic of that icon that we created as part of the logo. And so those are the 6 variants. And again, we overprinted obviously on all that stuff, and we have them. So while the Kickstarter is still there and the Indiegogo is still active for both of those, for book 1, eventually we will take that down because we just pre-launched book 2. And just to give a sense of what the story is about, it's really, it's really ultimately about this kid who has this tragic loss, and he has to basically find who he is after this loss. Like we take away his family, again, spoiling some of part 1. And then he meets this new character, this new companion, protector of his. And so while part 1, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but while part 1 kind of ends with their meeting, part 2 is really about the bond they build together. And while they're building and establishing that relationship that just starts in book 1, the bad guys, the antagonists of our story, they're going after them. They're looking for them. So it's really that march up to, or we're amplifying the stakes of the story while these two we're starting to get to know each other, and we as readers are getting to know them as characters in that dynamic. All setting the stage for obviously book 3, which is the last part in the trilogy of the three books. And one of the things that we also did with for all 3 books is each book is 72 pages long, the full thing. The main story that we're talking about here, The Boy and the Bot, is 48 pages of story. So it's almost like 2 issues of a comic book in one. And then there's a backup, an 8-page backup story that I wrote and drew myself. And that's 8 pages in the back of each of those stories as well. It's adjacent to the main narrative, but it's not related 100% to it. There's one scene in issue 1 where the boy is watching TV and talks about a comet. The backup story is related to that. Again, spoilers. But so there's the 8-page backup that's in each of those. So that's like 24 pages in total of that story. It's a very quick, short story. And then there's other, design material, dossiers, backup material. So again, end to end, it's 72 pages long, and that's times the 3 volumes. So that's what I've been working on. And right now, besides working on The Boy and the Bot, which I think is I love the story. Like people that have read it, they're like, wow, I can really see this as like an animated show. This could be like the next like Ben 10 type of thing. And my writing structure, because again, coming from reviewing entertainment and pitching entertainment type material, it has that sort of structure. It's more like a 5-act structure, but it's also like my breaks, while comic book-esque, they also kind of fit into those other kinds of mediums as well. And so I've been getting a lot of feedback that way. Like they love the story and I like how they could see this as going beyond, but we'll see. Fingers crossed. And but for me, it's about the comic book. It's about the storytelling and staying where I really want it to be, which is in the hands of kids. Because one of the things I think a lot of comic books are gearing more towards like adults, right? And one of the things I want to make sure, and that's why I wrote, we aged this book purposely at like 12 plus. And it's great because there's been people, I'm getting photos of like people that I know, like their 12-year-old or their younger son, daughter is sitting there on the couch looking at the book. And it's like, yes, that's what I'm looking for. I want a story that's going to resonate, bring them in younger and resonate with younger kids. And that's why our main character, the boy, is like 12 years old. Like I wanted it to be a character that's very relatable. He's sort of I don't call him the Peter Parker-esque, but he's definitely, you know, sort of a loner. He has like this one friend of his. He gets bullied at school, things that typical kids go through, you know. And so I wanted the character to be very relatable. And then through this incident that happens, you know, with his father and so on, sort of sets him on this course to, you know, with the robot and so on, to ultimately become the hero that he will eventually become. So. But so that's our story. I know, you know, I don't know if I'm making it overly exciting, but everyone who's read it has loved it, so I'm happy.
Yeah, yeah, you gave me the chance to check out the book,
Sure.
and I thought it was really great,
Oh, thank you.
very propulsive
Mhm.
in terms of the story, and exciting, and I do like that it's not overly adult. You know
Yes.
what you were saying about
Mhm.
focusing on that particular age range, because I mean we do need to get a new generation into comics. It's pretty vital, I'd say,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I think that our generation
Mhm.
is very much, you know, to a certain degree, very much into comics and the art form. And, you know, if we don't get the younger kids and folks in and the generations in, you know, it might be lost. You know, kudos to making that a very conscious effort for you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Like I said, like, you know, and to your point, like the story structure is very much like go go go, you know, the
Yeah.
action of the story. And you know, we start with the prologue, obviously, with the father, and that becomes the catalyst, like, so the back, like, that's where all the exposition happens to kind of set the stage for the entire narrative. And so we have that prologue, and then of course there's the call to action, what happens with the father. And then, you know, you have the son, then obviously, you know, we get introduced to him. And then obviously there's that turning point when all of a sudden this giant robot comes for him out of nowhere. And then we kind of exhale a little bit on their story in book two, because again, like I said, it's about them getting to know each other, you know. So I mean, there's some really warm-hearted stuff. And you know, it's like, how do I get them to be, you know, and I'm gonna use some of the pop cultures, like like a Calvin and Hobbes, or you know, like the Lion King,
Right.
where we build these moments. And you know, I don't have the ability to do montages in comics to show a span of time, right? So it's like, how do you get to that relationship and that bond between them very quickly, so that when you get to that third, you know, that third chapter, the big climax, that the things that happen there resonate emotionally for the reader, because you have to kind of earn that, right? And so book two, which, you know, we can talk about, is like, that's about the, like, earning those moments,
Hmm.
and building those relationships. And obviously the bad guys that are after him. And that's why I like the crux of the mystery of what is Project Blue, because what we start with is the father, who has sort of a turn of conscience moment, where the company he works for, which is what he started working for, which was for Noble Intent, which was like, you know, he works for a robotics company essentially, and they're about like helping with amputees of different types, right? So robotic arms and limbs, and we get into like AI, like healthcare providers and stuff like that, like home care nurses, but they're through this AI robotic format. And ultimately he gets put on a task of, because again, they see a lot of wounded warrior type folks, and they decide they want to open up their contract ideas to take in more of a military application to this, almost like building AI soldiers. And the father's like, well, that's not what I got, and that's not what I came here for. That's not what my calling in life is. It's not, I don't want to create war. I want to create helping people, right?
Hmm.
And so he has this moment of conscience where the company just goes too far, and he's just sort of had enough is enough for him. And he's a software engineer who programs a lot of this material. And so he decides, you know, again, in that moment, in that heated moment in his mind, to take the last bit of the thing that this company needs to finish this project that he's been working on. So he's holding the key to getting this project finished, and he leaves and he takes it with him. So the company is very much after him for what he did. And the other part to that is the company, prior to him doing this, was snooping around in his computer, because they check on everyone. And one of the things they find on his, again, they're trying to, through his workstation, they're trying to tap into his personal servers, what have you. And in there, they have found just a firewall of it. They don't know what it is yet, but it's this thing called Project Blue. and they don't know what it is, but they don't know if he was doing something malicious or moonlighting with another company, whatever that is, but they want to know what it is. So it becomes sort of a very early cat and mouse thing between the company wanting their software, their materials back, and then the other part is finding out what this Project Blue is. And so all the forces of this company start to go after the father, which then ultimately, through the climax of book one, we go into book two, which is now the ramifications of what happens in book one, how the company is addressing those things that happened and how they're pushing forward to get their stuff back because they have the pressure of the military wanting these soldiers delivered in time for a presentation that they're giving to get this major war, this major contract. So again, that's the catalyst of the story, and ultimately they're going to do whatever they have to get their material back because for them the consequences are too high not to do whatever they want to do, including harming this boy if so be it.
Right.
So that's like I said, that driving force, and and things that I was sort of inspired by a lot of those sort of like Tony Scott films, those Jerry Bruckheimer films where it's like go go go,
Yeah.
and again, that's all of book one is like, wow, that's that to your point, it's like it's a lot of quick beats of getting through to that climatic end to set the stage. And like I said, on one side we take a beat, take a minute to get to know the kid and the bot dynamic, but the other stuff, the marching to the next climax is still happening. So that's why it's like it's that 5-act structure, right? We're building and building and building to will be the climax. And book three, really, if you look at book two is a lot of act two, a little bit of three, and then book three will be a lot of act three, and then like the epilogue and all the things that come after. And because of the way that I wrote the story, we're already, besides this story, and I will come back and we can talk about the other stuff we're working on, but this is the beginnings of it. But right now on the table, we have 3 other stories that are being worked on. I have another artist working on another book. I'm illustrating and writing a book because now I'll have the sort of the longer runway because like
Yeah.
not only managing this project, but then draw myself, for myself. So I'll be illustrating one of the titles and a mini series for that. And then another artist is working on a 3rd book for us. So we have 3 other books other than this book finishing up, volume 3. We have 3 other books being worked on at all times right now throughout the week. And it's been great. And it's all part of the same universe is what we're doing. Like, so there's some secondary characters that have maybe minor parts or lesser parts in The Boy and the Bot that become the main character in another one. So I wouldn't say it's not like Avengers where it's a very linear, like, you got to kind of watch one or read one to get to the next and the next.
Right.
It's more, even though it's not thematically or, rating wise, if you want to call it that, but like Sin City, where it's like, there's the bar and the characters may cross paths. Like, it's just, they all live in the same world. It's just, you're not beholden to read one thing to understand the other.
Got it.
It's like, even like, we may even just give like a little bit of a nod to The Boy and the Bot in this other book we're working on, but then it has like, it's just to set the stage. And one of the pivotal things for all these stories is that Winthrop company, that corporation. And because when I was writing the original story, I was like, well, there's the Winthrop company, right? The parent company. And under that parent company, there's all these other ones. Like there's the Winthrop Labs, which is where this father works, right? And then they own other companies as well. I was like, wow, that's my sci-fi thriller. That's my horror book. That's like, and I realized like I was going to get all these different genres through this one pivot point, which is this one major company that they all sort of dovetail in and out of. So like I said, right now I'm working on the one I'm doing is almost like I don't spoil too much, but it's like almost like a female John Wick type of story. So I'm drawing that one now. I have another artist who's working on, I'll call it my sort of horror suspense story. It's in the vein of like, if you remember the movie like Angel Heart, like that kind of,
Yep.
yeah, it's like it's sort of playing in that space. And then I have this other story that we're working on, which is it starts as a horror thing and it kind of quickly turns into something else, which is going to be a little fun. So yeah, so that's what the plans are right now, and so far so good.
And we're back. Tom has a great drive and ambition with these new projects. I'd love to see more of the books come out, more of The Boy and the Bot, but also some of the other ideas he was sketching out and previewing with us. So go out there and please support Another Door Comics and The Boy and the Bot when it comes out again on Kickstarter and Indiegogo very soon, issue 2. Thank you, Tom, for being on the program. Thank you all out there for listening and for viewing and for, say it with me, rating, reviewing, subscribing, helping us get the word out about Dollar Bin Bandits. That's all for today, and we'll see you next issue.